you everyone for joining us today. This is the Viante New Mexico podcast. Viante New Mexico is a nonpartisan organization that aims to provide transparency and accountability to our state elected officials to find those who are working together to fix New Mexico's crime, education, and quality of life issues. Our aim is to get this information into the hands of everyday New Mexicans so that way they can be armed with more information and make decisions on their own and hold our leaders accountable. Today we are talking about divisive political rhetoric and how do we overcome it when we want to have a constructive conversation with people who may think differently from us. How can we still hold a conversation? And I'm sure this is something we may experience at some of our dinner tables at home with our family. So with us today, we have Melissa and Neil Wright. Thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And I failed to mention myself. My name is Rhiannon Samuel. I am the Executive Director of Viante. Now, before we kick it off, I want to give a brief bio about Melissa and Neil and why they're sitting with us today. They are a very remarkable duo. So they are a husband and wife, psychotherapist, and linguist team providing interdisciplinary insights, highlighting and amplifying core messages, and giving communication trainings to systems wanting to enhance and transcend standard communication practices in order to cultivate healthier, more dynamic relationships. Neil has a master's degree in clinical psychology, and Melissa has a master's degree in linguistics. She has worked as a content analyst, conversational analyst, and authorship attribution analyst, right?
Yep.
And Neil, I totally eliminated a sentence from here, but you do some private therapy, right, and psychology sessions too, correct?
Absolutely. I've worked in nonprofits, for-profits, and I have my own private practice.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I am so excited about this conversation because I know, as I had kind of foreshadowed before, having political conversations with loved ones and friends can be scary at times. It can be challenging and frustrating.
Yep.
So let's kick it off with generally speaking, describe how you feel people talk about politics in America.
Sure.
Oh boy, it's evolved over the last 10 years, but it's always been fascinating. There's those social norms where we're not supposed to talk about religion, we're not supposed to talk about politics. I think that plays into everything still.
Absolutely. And it is really interesting, just coming from my linguistic perspective, but you always hear people talking about people on the other side of the aisle, right? So there's like almost a literal metaphor in our conceptualization of political parties, and it's one or the other, and there's this kind of thing in the middle being the aisle, and you're not on the aisle, you're never in the aisle together. It's one side or the other, two different parties. There's a separation there. So
it immediately establishes this versus mentality, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Us versus them.
Mm-hmm.
But is that the reality?
Nope.
Doesn't have to be. Not
Doesn't
at all.
have to be.
Mm-mm.
Well, tell me, so what do you think? Do you think it's just the way we talk about it that makes it seem divisive, but in reality we're much more all in the middle there? Or how does that work out? What does that look like?
It's all survival based. So everything, you can hear it in the way you boil it down. People are talking about their survival, the way that they can maintain their status, lifestyle, etc. And they come at it from certain angles. And so you see it in the metaphors they use. You see it in the what are they called? Analogies that they use.
That word.
But even like right now, even thinking about it, I can tell my anxiety goes up because I don't want to make one person upset or the other. And so it's all about emotion and survival.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because they're kind of, I mean, if you boil it down, what we're all kind of fighting for when we discuss any political issue is how we want to live our life within the confines of our American ways, right? We're all fighting for trying to find ways of life that are better for, numbers of people, for different demographics, how we want to go about that. We may disagree in implementation, but we're all kind of fighting for the same thing if you think about it, and that is how do we get to live our life the most fruitfully? How do we get to thrive in this American dream that we're trying to create and trying to live within?
Yeah. And you guys, you moved here to New Mexico recently, right?
Yep.
Yeah, a little less than a year ago.
Well, still welcome. I hope you're still loving it.
We love it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
So, is New Mexico any better or worse at this political talk and this divisiveness?
Yep. Better.
Better. Yeah.
Really?
Hands
Why
down.
is that?
So I've thought about this before because it was kind of jarring to come into it new and be like, whoa, people can talk. And it seems to me, after just like meeting people and kind of just my naturally analytical brain, I mean, at its core, New Mexico is a state, it's like a desert state, essentially, right? And it's interesting because a desert, you know, if you go back to kind of hunter and gatherer days, if you pull from that mindset, it's very like resource based. And for my family, right, I have to fight for my survival. But we're living in a modern day where we have to say, I live within a community and we need the community to function. And so I wonder how much that plays into it. Okay, I have my resources and you have yours, but we also have to interact. But also, New Mexico has a lot of different cultures, and you see them all present in everyday life in New Mexico, in the food and the colors and the, you know, events. They all have their kind of identity, but then they all celebrate each other as well. So then there's that acknowledgement of differences, and that's really amazing and cool, but also we can acknowledge the differences and say that's where we are separated. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Differences don't have to be a bad thing. So that's kind of my theory at this point, but I mean, it's beautiful. It's amazing.
The consciousness here is much more available, so you can connect to each other's awareness of things. There's kind of always looking out for your neighbors. I know there's a high crime rate, and so even the way people approach that, it's so much different than a lot of other states. It's unique in its ability to see issues for what they actually are and not just the symptoms that are coming up as a result of the actual core concerns. And so it creates just an amazing platform for people to be more multicultural, more aware.
Mm-hmm. So, Melissa, I want to dive in a little bit about what I think you were describing is this scarcity mindset of New Mexicans, or like what may have been historical or cultural references for us. But the fact that we have a multicultural state, and that it's not just identifying that there's diversity, but celebrating it. So how and when would those two things collide?
The divergence versus the celebration of it, you mean?
Yeah, correct. So like the scarcity mindset of like, this is my little piece of land, this is my little like way of life, please don't disturb it, as opposed to everyone has a different way of life and we love, celebrate, and uplift one another.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can see it. I mean, if we're just kind of going down to things that, you know, Albuquerqueans can do, for example, museums, for example, they have these kind of traveling exhibits. There was one, I think it might have just ended on Japanese American internment camps, right? They have that kind of cultural thing, and then they tell stories about local Japanese Americans who've experienced that, so they celebrate that while acknowledging, okay, we didn't handle this correctly in the past, kind of thing. Museums are a big part of that, I believe, because, again, they have this kind of where you bring it in and out, these exhibits, and you get to kind of look at it and experience it and read about it. But you can see it, even the holiday stroll last December, it was being new to New Mexico. It was my first time being in a kind of a Christmas celebration, which is kind of like typical American celebration, but then you had like a mariachi band, and then you get to experience, kind of that culture playing into it. And I just kept thinking, this is amazing. I can go around the corner and find a different celebration of Christmas altogether, or a different celebration of this particular old town event altogether. So I think it's really cool because they come together, but at the same time they kind of stake out their little, this is my arena to perform in, or this is my arena for my space and my exhibit. So just little ways like that, I think the everyday ways, which is the most important for creating patterns of cohesiveness, I believe. So Yeah, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yep.
Neil, do you have anything to add?
Of course, as
Of
usual.
course.
I think it's all about the unwritten rules that are kind of floating in between people. I've noticed a significant difference. I grew up coming here and on vacations, seeing the Native Americans, going to powwows and different things, and seeing how there's so much more respect just built into the culture of each other's cultures. Whereas in a lot of other states, unfortunately, there's like a hands-off. We don't mix, we don't mingle cultures as much in other states. And that's not to say that they're doing it wrong or right. I'm just saying there's more accessibility for people to connect here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, again, consciousness, the unwritten rule of, no, we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that respect originate?
I got to think it has something to do, so you can take an anthropological point of view. It's just everybody's here. Whereas you go to different regions of the United States, there's a bit more homogeneous makeup of the populations. And so it has an effect. It has an effect on those unwritten rules that say you don't associate with the others or the other side.
And I think also part of it, too, is that New Mexico as a state, even just landscape-wise, has a lot of potential for you to be immersed in other cultures. For example, the Native American culture, if you don't understand much about that, all you have to do is, for a little peek into it, even go to the petroglyphs and, just admire them and look at that and say, wow, these are what their ancestors did. It's still here. And they're still, fighting for their land and for their rights and for their ability to have that place as a place of honor, as a place of worship for themselves and their people. But you can literally go somewhere and immerse yourself in it. And it doesn't have to be you saying, oh, okay, you're forcing your culture upon me. It can be, wow, I see what your culture is. I see what it's made up of. I see its DNA. And I think a lot of people confuse sides wanting to convey their point of view. I think a lot of people kind of may feel that as being conform to my point of view. I want you to conform to what I'm saying rather than I'm just trying to invite you in.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect segue into what I really want to dive into in this conversation is how do we have that open conversation around politics in particular, where let me invite you in to see my perspective without trying to, quote unquote, convert you to my beliefs. So where does that start? How do we achieve it? And I'm looking for like nuts and bolts. Let's apply this tonight at the dinner table kind of solutions.
I think something that is easily lost in conversation mindset-wise is the fact that when you're having a conversation with someone, you don't ever know what they're thinking, nor can you control it. So it's kind of a weird thing, but I can tell you something and you don't have to understand it, and you don't have to agree with it, and you don't have to. But you can tell me you agree with it, or you can tell me I hate you for thinking that, or whatever it is that you say. But I can't control what you're thinking. So whether or not you lie to me and I say, oh, good, she agrees with me, I can't control whether you actually do. All I can do in the conversation is I can use my language to set an example for a healthy trajectory and a calm conversation and allow for the fact that there may be variances in mindsets and opinions and frames of mind. So I think a lot of that comes into play because we want so badly for someone to see what we're saying and we want them to agree with us. But that doesn't have to happen. All that has to happen is that we have to feel heard, and we can set that example with the way we talk in conversation.
It almost plays into that golden rule we were all taught growing up. Treat others as you want to be treated. And
Absolutely.
So in this context, it doesn't ring any more true where talk to others as you'd like to be talked to.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be talked down to and say, this is the way things should be, and these are the ideologies that this country and the state really need. It's just tell me why you feel the way you do.
Absolutely. Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
You guys did that at your event. I mean, it was remarkable. You guys brought together a Republican and a Democrat, and you literally had a conversation and showed that's it right there. We can do it.
Yeah.
Evidence. And everybody was saying my favorite phrase, I see what you're saying. They didn't go into, I see what you're saying, but you're completely wrong here, here, and here. It was, okay, I can respect that. Let's work together. I see what you're saying.
Yes. And to provide some context for the listener, so Viante, we hosted our first year anniversary event a couple weeks ago. Melissa and Neil were there. And part of the program was having a discussion with Senator Michael Padilla, who is a Democrat in our New Mexico state legislature, and Representative Jim Townsend, who is the House Minority Leader, and he's a Republican. Both very different parts of what we were talking about, the aisle. Yep. But the fact that they can come together despite having deep philosophical differences on the way that what a solution looks like, and still say, those aside, what can we get behind? And just as importantly, on those things that we do disagree on, I'm hearing you. I don't have to agree, but I'm hearing you, and that's what we're asked to do as electeds. So I'm glad that came across. I think
that's amazing.
We have so many elected officials that truthfully are really striving towards that goal. And so often more of the divisiveness is highlighted. And so the more that we can highlight those folks that are doing the good, that are having those tough to have conversations, quite frankly, those are the people worth celebrating. Those are the ones that should get on the media, right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's it's all hot and popular to get on the media because you're saying something really inflammatory and scandalous, but we need to start framing it as, look at these guys, they're having a conversation, and that's so great for all of us.
Well, and how silly is it that we have to shed light on a simple, respectful conversation is an anomaly, right?
Yeah, and it is hard, and something that I think is definitely happening and playing out kind of in real time in front of us right now is the fact that, I don't think this is, any different if we're viewing American politics at large. The divisive rhetoric isn't necessarily anything super different. It's the same kind of strategies and things like that, but I think the sides are becoming so polarized because they're digging in their heels, and that is creating a deeper divide between the two. And now, conservatives may hear, liberal as kind of a dirty word, and liberals may hear Republicans as a dirty word, and it's become offensive immediately and almost obscene to be on the other side of the aisle from one perspective or the other. And it's a shame.
When really everyone's an individual and everyone's entitled to their opinion, and we can see the commonalities show up all the time, no matter how, almost in some ways, how far you are either way. It's always about survival. It's about emotional health. It's about family health, finances, the same themes and categories, but people toss each other so far away, or they just kind of throw their rhetoric at each other as opposed to saying, here's where I'm at, where are you at?
And what was it you said earlier? You said something about how what was off the table needs to be back on the table at the table.
Yes.
At home. Yeah.
Keep it out. The more we do continued communication, the better off we all are.
So I'm thinking to where I see the worst of this behavior. And social media comes to mind, right?
Yep.
We all have those folks that we follow, and maybe we wonder why we follow them, who are so inflammatory. How do we handle that?
Oh, I love it. All right. So here's the key. There's this thing called Disinhibition Effect, where people jump on a computer or jump online on social media, and there's that lack of face-to-face. So it gets rid of what in linguistics they call the cooperative principle, which is I respect you, you respect me, we're not going to fight physically. But their disinhibition effect, it's just disinhibition effect. It allows people to just fire off, and there's no consequences. So what we can do is model it, show people, hey, I see you. I know it looks like you're really upset with my comment there. Curious what you mean, why that upsets you so much, as opposed to lecturing each other.
Yes.
Pop that in there, see where that takes you.
And you lose so much behind a screen because the things that can give us pause or give us a little zing of anxiety or give us compassion when we're face to face, if I say something out of anger and it hurts your feelings and I see your tears in your eyes begin to well up, I'm going to feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that way. Or if I say something that makes you really happy and I see a smile on your face, I'm not going to feel that, oh, good, I made someone happy for today. You lose so much of that, the eye contact, I don't know what they mean. Okay, so I need to reframe it. So there's no way of telling who's getting your messages and how it's coming across, and add to that the fact that there's a screen and they don't have to answer for anything they can say, so they can say whatever they want. And it's harmful more than anything.
There's a quote from a really famous psychologist, Carl Jung, and I'm paraphrasing it, but basically he says, a healthy man does not torture. Usually it is the tortured who do the torturing. So if you think about that, right, a lot of people are feeling bullied. They're struggling to communicate their voice. The more people can tell their stories and communicate, as opposed to commiserate with other people who are being bullied too, or becoming bully groups, the better off, the healthier we are.
Yeah. To wrap it up, I want some closing thoughts, knowing that at this table, we're all committed to really not trying to find what divides us, but what unites us. I mean, I'm sure you and I might be on different sides of the aisle again politically, but I don't know what that is, because that's not what I care about. I care about connecting you on a personal and a human level, which is why we're able to have such constructive, open, and healthy conversations. So how do other like-minded folks do that? And what else do you hope to see?
So one thing that I've kind of been ruminating on lately is the idea of categories in our language and our conceptualizations of other people. And I think we're so focused on the smaller categories, like Neil is my family, and that's it. And so that automatically makes you other, right? Or if Dale was sitting right here, that you would say, this is my coworker, and that would make us other. And so I think it would be really healthy if we could widen our categories to say we're Albuquerqueans, we're New Mexicans, we are Americans, we are all human. At the very least, we are all human, regardless of race or gender, political affiliations, anything like that. We're all human. We're all kind of fighting for the same thing, which is to be able to live our lives in healthy ways. And I think the more we're able to construct categories that have a wider range so that we can let more people in to our conversations and to our minds, I think the more we're going to be able to have healthy, constructive conversation.
Neil.
And I have a category for everybody. I'm a geek, so I'm sorry. It's called hominidae. Everyone that is a human being is a hominidae, and that also extends to chimps, apes, etc. Right? We're all in the same category together right there. So I say stop seeing it as an aisle, see it as a lane. It's a lane we can go down together as fellow hominidae who are just trying to figure out how to navigate this ever-evolving world. With the climate shifting, whether you agree with that or not, look at the wider context. There's people being displaced. There's a lot of things happening that are having ripple effects into every single town and culture all the time. So if we can just see each other as at least that, fellow humans, fellow hominidae, I think we can get into a lane of progress, no matter your categories or frustrations.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. I think if I were to capture this conversation today in a sentence, I'd say it would be see or speak to others as you'd like to be seen or spoken to.
Absolutely.
Bingo.
Always.
From there, we can have any conversation, even those taboo topics, whether it be religion, politics. Follow, see, or speak to others as you'd like to be seen or spoken to. We'll be able to nail it, right?
Absolutely.
We'll be able to
Going forward.
tackle any challenge we see.
Yes.
Yep, stay open.
I want to thank everyone for tuning in. If you like this kind of conversation around finding common ground, looking past our differences to see what our similarities are, please look at fiantenm.org, and see what we're working on to improve New Mexico together. I want to say a special thank you to Melissa Neil Wright for being with us today.
Of course, thank you for having us.
Thanks for doing what you guys are doing.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's important.
And thank you to SunWest Trust for allowing us to use their space to record these podcasts and to get this message out to all of you. Thank you, and we'll talk to you next time.
See you.